Welcome to the latest installment of the 30-minute workout series. My name is Jeff Bartels, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Jerry Bartels, Angel Espinosa, and Alan Gilbert. In today's session, we are going to be taking a deep dive look at Civil 3D code set styles. If you're unfamiliar with the 30-minute workout concept, this is something that we put together for the purpose of giving us an opportunity to demonstrate tools and features that aren't covered during traditional training courses. Our hope in putting together these sessions is that we can help shorten the learning curve for these features and provide even more value for folks that with their Autodesk investment. We do have some ground rules with the sessions. In the interest of time, I'm not going to run through all of these today. I am going to focus on questions if I could. If you have questions, please put those in the Q&A pane. That's the most efficient way for Jerry, Alan, and Angel to field those during the session. Since we do have a jam-packed session today, I want to say that if we don't get to all the questions during the session, we will get back to you with an answer. One more thing, if you'd like to have a one-on-one follow-up call with us regarding the topics that we cover during these sessions, please put that in the Q&A pane as well. We'll get that on the schedule. We always enjoy speaking with other users. For our agenda today, we're going to be taking a look at Civil 3D code set styles. We'll talk about where they're applied. We'll look at the many things that they control. During today's session, the majority of today's session, we are going to be building a code set style from scratch. At the end of today's session, I'm going to be sharing some additional resources if you'd like to explore this topic even further. As always, this is going to be a PowerPoint free zone. We'll be working live in the application for the duration of our time together today. Let's drop out of this. In the interest of full disclosure, I am working in Civil 3D 2022.1. Having said that, everything that we look at today is going to work for you regardless of the version of Civil 3D that you may be using. So let's start with just a high-level description of a code set style. At a high level, the code set style controls the appearance and labeling of corridor stuff. Let me be a little bit more specific. There are 4 places where code set styles come into play in Civil 3D. Code set styles are applied to your corridor models to control their appearance. If I hover over this corridor, we can see the code set style there in the tooltip. It's called Autodesk Corridor Working. Code set styles are applied to your assemblies. If I come over here to my assembly and I hover, we can see the code set style there. It's called Autodesk Assembly. Code set styles are applied in the section editor. If I select the corridor and come up to the ribbon and choose section editor, right here you can see that sectioned corridor geometry. And if I go to view edit options here at the bottom of the dialog box, you can see the code set style that I'm using. Happens to be the same code set style that I'm using for my assembly. In my template, I thought, as I'm stepping through the various assembly insertions here in my corridor, it might be nice if the section view looked just like the assembly that I see in model space. Let's close this. One more place, code set styles are associated with your cross sections. I'm going to change my scale here momentarily to make this a little easier to see. When I zoom in, you can see that sectioned corridor geometry. If I hover over this, it doesn't say code set style, but that's what that is. Autodesk sections plot. That is the style that's controlling the appearance and labeling of this section view. Let's flip my scale back to 50. And we'll take a look at a code set style. Code set styles can be found on the Settings tab of the tool space. If we go under the General category, under Multi-Purpose Styles, right here we'll find the Code Set Styles category, and we can see the code set styles that are in this file. If you remember, the code set style assigned to my corridor is called Autodesk Corridor Working. I'm going to double-click to open that style up in the editor, and then I'm going to click to expand these items. And when I do, I can say that the first time I started using Civil 3D and I saw a code set style, I thought to myself, you know what? There's a lot of stuff in here. This has got to be really complicated to work with. In fact, it's not bad at all. Let me minimize these items. When it comes down to it, a code set style can be reduced to 3 things: points, links, and shapes. It controls the appearance and stylization of these 3 types of objects and the objects created from these objects. Let's talk a little more about points, links, and shapes. I'm going to do that by closing out of this, and I'll zoom in on my assembly. When we build an assembly, we bring subassembly parts from a tool palette, and we use those to build our assembly or our typical section. If I hover over these, you can see the individual subassembly parts that were selected. These subassembly parts represent the foundation of our corridor, and they are built from points, links, and shapes. The points are represented as these rings. The points correspond to the endpoints of the geometry that's drawn here. Really nice thing about these points is they're coded. If I hover over a point, I can see from a programming perspective, Civil 3D knows what this point is. It's the top of curb. This point here happens to be the back of curb. If I pan this over, this point here happens to be sidewalk in. Since those points are coded, it makes it very easy to apply labels. Just imagine if I was going to label this assembly and I said, I would like to place a label at the back of curb. All I have to do is say, put a label within the code set style. I could just say, put a label at all the points that have a back of curb code. Okay, makes it very easy for me to put labels where I want them. We'll look at that in a little bit. From a corridor perspective, the points are used to create the longitudinal feature lines that define our corridor model. If I come over here, we can see the assemblies that are inserted to create this corridor. And then we can zoom in and see the feature lines. If I hover over these feature lines, I can see the same codes: back of curb, top of curb, there's sidewalk in. So as the assemblies are inserted, the points are connected to create those feature lines. Let's talk about links now. Links represent the linear connections between points. So basically the line work. These links can have codes. If I hover over this link, I see it has 3 codes: top, datum, and sod. If I hover over this daylight link, I can see it has 4 codes: top, datum, daylight, and daylight cut. The fact that these links have codes makes it easy to apply labels as well. If I was labeling this, I could go through and say every link that has a daylight code, put a slope label on it. Every link that has a sod code, put a grade label. The link here in the roadway from the center to the edge of traveled way is called pave. That's how I placed the grade label there. I said, look for all of the links that are called pave and put a grade label on them. When it comes to the corridor, links are used to create your surfaces. They can also be used to create hatch patterns and assign render materials. We'll look at that here in a little bit. Finally, we'll talk about shapes. Shapes come into play any place where we have 3 or more links that create a closed area. For instance, I've got a closed area here. These shapes can have codes. As an example, if I hover over this shape, I can see it's called sub-base. If I hover over this one, I can see it's called curb. And you probably wouldn't be surprised if I hover over to this one, it's called sidewalk. Shapes can be labeled as well, not as common, but they can be. When it comes to the corridor model, shapes are used to extract material quantities, average end area material quantity. Back in the old days, we used to trace these shapes by hand and then calculate the trapezoidal volume between the sections or between the assembly insertions. We don't have to do that anymore because these shapes are already defined and they're coded. I could just go through and say, I would like the material volume for the sidewalk, or I would like the material volume for the curb when my corridor has been created. So that's points, links, and shapes. Let's create a code set style. On the settings tab, I'm going to right click on code set styles and I'll choose new. We'll make a brand new one from scratch. Here on the information tab, I'm going to call this 30 minutes code set style. If I go to the codes tab, we can see those 3 components: points, links, and shapes. If I expand each of these has 2 options: default and no codes. What this means is coded or uncoded. We're going to talk about points first. So I'm going to close up shape and link. And I'm going to, based on what we see here, I have, if the point is a coded point, if it has a code assigned to it, you can see that I can assign a style to that point. I can also assign a label to it. And if I have points that are uncoded, I have the option of assigning a style to them and a label. And we can do that for the other items as well, links and shapes. Let me show you one more thing. I'm going to be selecting some styles here. Let me show you where those styles are located. I'm going to click OK. Here in the same multi-purpose styles area, right down here is where we can find shape styles. Shapes are where we can find them and create them. Link styles. And then they're not called point styles in here because point styles are associated with Kogo points. They're called marker styles in here. So those are the 3 areas where we can create those styles. I'm going to double click to go back into the editor. So when it comes to points, let's make a change. I'm going to say, if I have points that are coded, I will select a marker style. I'll choose this one called white circle. And not going to get into this too heavy. I just want to show you what the style kind of looks like. If I go into the editor, basically I've just forced the marker to be white. You could use whatever properties you want here. If I go to the marker tab, you can see it's just going to be a circle and I've got the size set there. Let's click OK and OK. So that's for coded points. If it's an uncoded point, I'm going to pick another style. I'll grab this one called Orange X. And if I click the editor, no magic here. I just chose an X. set the size, and I set the display. I just forced it to be orange. Let's click OK, OK, and OK. I'm going to force my new code set style onto my assembly. I'll do that by selecting the assembly, and then I will come down here and change the style to 30-minute code set style. When I do, watch the points. That's what we're interested in right now. If I zoom in, you can see the white circles representing the points that have codes. Once again, we can confirm that just by hovering. I can see the code. We can also see the points that do not have codes, have the orange X, and I can hover over that and I can verify that those are uncoded. So using the code set style, I can control the appearance of those points. Let's control the appearance of the links now. I'm going to jump back into the code set style, and I'm going to drag this over just a touch. Under link, I'm going to say if it's a coded link, I can apply a style to that. I'm going to choose one here called white line. And if I go to the editor, basically I'm saying that the component, I'm just forcing it to be white. And if it's an uncoded link, I'm going to use the style called orange line. No magic. I'm just forcing it to be orange. When I click apply, we can see the change on screen. Very easy to tell which links have codes and which ones do not based on the stylization. Finally, let's talk about shapes. So coded versus uncoded. We'll say if it's a coded shape, I'm going to use this style called red fill. And let's take a closer look at the shape styles. When it comes to shape styles, there's actually two components. One represents the border line or the outside boundary of that shape. You can see in this case, mine is turned off. I typically leave these turned off because the geometry is really redundant. The links are duplicated in that area. So I typically don't show the boundary. I also have an option of showing a fill. I am choosing to show that component. I'm just forcing it to be red. If we look down here, I can choose a pattern for that since it's going to be a hatch. Solid fill is the default, but I could set that to predefined and I could pick from any one of the AutoCAD hatch patterns. We're going to leave this set to solid fill for right now. I could choose my angle and my scale down here. Let's click OK and OK. So if it's a coded shape, it's going to be a red fill. And then if it's an uncoded shape, I'll use this style called no fill. And how did I do that? Basically, I said just don't show either component. Let's click OK and OK. I'll click apply. And if I drag this down, very easy to see that all of those shapes have codes because they all have that solid fill hatch pattern on them. Now, the red color on screen is a little aggressive on the eyes. So for right now, in my code set style, I'm going to say, let's take those coded shapes and I am going to set those to be no fill. So coded or not, we'll make those no fill. I'll click apply and OK. So using the code set style, we can control the appearance of the points, links, and shapes. Let's look at how we can apply some labels. Maybe I'd like to label the back of curb, for instance. I'm going to come back to my code set style, and I'm going to expand the point category. Remember, I'm looking for like that back of curb point code. Here's my challenge. I don't have much granular control over the points. Basically, I can apply a label to a coded point, all coded points, or I can apply a label to the uncoded points. As an example, I can open this up and I can select a label style. And I've got one here that I could use. Now, we talked about label styles a few weeks ago. No magic to this. This label style is just two components. It's a line with an offset label. So just as an example, I'll assign that. And when I click apply, notice what happens. It's applying the code or the point to all of the coded or the labels going on all the coded points, which is not what I want. Let me set that to none, and I'll click apply to clean that up. So to label that specific code, I need access to it. I'm going to come down and click the import codes button. I will then click on that curb and gutter subassembly, and I'll press enter. And you can see that Civil 3D pulls those point codes into my code set style. Not just the point codes, but it also extracted the shape codes and the link codes for that object. Now I have granular control over these codes. You can see that the ones came in have the same setting as the default. I'm going to come down to back of curb here, and I'm going to say, let's put a label just on the back of curb. When I click apply, you can see that it placed a label at both instances. Now, maybe I'd like to place a label at the crown of the road or the edge of traveled way, or maybe at my daylight. I'm going to need some more codes. I'll click import codes, and I'll select this subassembly and this one and this one. I don't have to go through and grab all of them because the ones over here are duplicated. We press enter. And now my code set style's kind of starting to look like the one that we saw at the beginning. So really not bad. I'm just seeing the codes that are being used by the assembly parts here. Under point, I'll go to my daylight code and I will put a label on this. You can see those showing up there. I'll put a label on the edge of traveled way. And I'll put a label here at the crown of the road. If I drag that down, you can see how easy it was to put the labels there. Let's look at how we can label the links. I am going to close up the point category and I'll expand link. Here's all the link codes that are being leveraged in my assembly. If you remember, the links here were called daylight. I will find the daylight link and we'll pick a label style for that. I have one that I created called slope. When I click apply, you can see how it's placed on the daylight links. If you remember, these links were called sod. I'm going to come down to the sod code. We'll put a label on that. I'll use a grade label in this case. You can see that. And then the links that we have here from the crown of the road to the edge of traveled way were called pave. Let's drag this over. I'll find that pave code and I will put a grade label on that as well. Finally, we'll look at the shapes. For the shape example, I'm going to expand this and you can see that I have granular control over all the codes now. We'll say maybe the sub base, which is the area down here. Maybe I'd like to put a fill on the sub base. I'll expand this and we'll use that red fill option. And then I've got a label style I created earlier that it's labeling the code for that. Let me click OK. And when I click apply and OK and zoom in, you can see that it has hatched the sub base shapes and it has labeled them with the shape code. I'm making a code set style that maybe I could use for an assembly, but I could use the same workflow. This could be a code set style that I use for my cross sections or that I want to see displayed in my section editor. Let's talk about some of the other things that the code set style controls. I'm going to drag this over to my corridor. If you remember, the code set style I'm using for this one is called Autodesk Corridor Working. I'm going to double click to open up that code set style in the editor. Notice that in my corridor, I can see my assembly insertions here. Why? Because in this code set style, if I expand the link category, you can see that I've got a style associated with the links. And that style, if I was to bring that up in the editor, you can see that it's visible and it's going to be the cyan color. That's exactly what we're seeing. Let me click OK and OK. Now, I've been known to create multiple code set styles depending on the type of work that I'm doing. I've got a code set style here that I would apply to my corridor when I'm making edits. It shows the feature lines, it shows the assemblies, things like that. I have another code set style that I would use for the purpose of plotting. Let's select that. I am going to grab my corridor. And then from the properties palette, I'm going to change the code set style to this one called corridor plot. Notice that all we can see is the feature lines. Why is that? If I go into the corridor plot code set style and I look at the link codes, you can see that I've got these set to hide. It's basically a no display style. If I bring that up in the editor, you can see I've set that to no display. The no display style is probably one of the most versatile styles you can create in Civil 3D. In all of my templates, pretty much every Civil 3D object has a corresponding no display style. Makes it a really easy way to turn things on and off. That's how I'm getting away with just seeing the feature lines. The code set style is also used to assign the properties of these feature lines. Let's open up my corridor plot code set style. If you remember, the point codes are what create these linear features. So I'm going to go to point. And then if I drag this out far enough, we've seen there's the point code, there's the marker style, and I'm not displaying a marker. I'm not displaying any labels. But if I take this down a little further, you can see a feature line style column. This is where I can select the feature lines that I'd like to use when these dots are connected. And you can see I've got no display feature lines. That's how I'm controlling which ones I see and which ones I don't. If I come over here to back of curb, you can see that the back of curb points are being connected using this curb and gutter style. That's what's creating the geometry here. If you look here, you can see my daylight, and the daylight point code is creating that feature line. Now I'm going to make a change to my code set style. me drag this out a little bit further. And I'm going to select a completely different style. I'm going to set this to no display, kind of like I want to turn it off. Let me click OK. And then I'm going to click OK to close out of this. And when I do, when I first started using Civil 3D, I had the expectation that that line would have disappeared, and it doesn't. When you create a corridor, these feature lines are drawn. If you change the property of the code set style, if you assign different feature line styles to your code set style that's assigned to this corridor, you have to redraw the corridor. These feature lines have to be redrawn to take on those properties. Let me show you what I mean. I'll select the corridor, and I will go to corridor properties. And here on the parameters tab, if I collapse this, you can see I've just got one baseline, and this baseline has a single region where my assembly is swept. So it's not a complicated corridor. These toggles show us which parts of the corridor are being drawn. I'm going to click to remove that toggle, and I'll click apply and rebuild. That undraws the corridor. I will then redraw this by clicking that toggle again. I'll click apply and rebuild. And when it redraws it, it will redraw it using the current code set style state. That's what gets rid of that feature line. Let me click OK. One more thing I want to show you. I've got a feature line here. If I hover over this one, it's called hinge_fill. I'm going to go into my code set style. Let's say I'd like to turn that feature line off. Well, I need to get access to that code. If I go to the point list here, I would come down, and you can see I can't find hinge_fill doesn't exist. The only way I can turn that off is to get that code in there and assign the appropriate feature line style to it. Now, we've seen that I can import codes. I could click this, and I could go grab the daylights and try and bring that code in. But I show you that just to show you that you can add the codes manually. If I right click on this header, I can choose add, and then it says, okay, you want to add a brand new code. What marker style do you want to give it? I'm going to give it the same style as these other ones. And if I drag this down, it comes in alphabetical. So there's that brand new code there. I'm going to double click on this, and I'll call it hinge_fill. So now I have that code. And if I drag this over, here's where I could select the feature line style. Now I got lucky. It picked the one that I needed, no display. So that's perfect. Let me click OK. And then I'm going to redraw this to get that line to go away. I'll select the corridor. I'll go to corridor properties. And then if I had a really complicated corridor, I could use the toggle up here. Does everybody? I could say undraw, rebuild, redraw. These toggles are nice. If you have a really complicated corridor, you can undraw certain areas to kind of free up things on screen so you don't have as much geometry in your drawing. So it's another use for that feature. Let me click OK, and you can see that hinge line is gone. Another thing that we can do is I can use the code set style to apply hatch patterns to my corridor. If I double click on this code set style, we talked about how the links can be used to create surfaces. Let me open up the link codes here. So the links are typically used to build surfaces. Well, if you imagine, instead of building a surface, I could build a hatch pattern from the links. I could do the same thing. If I come down to my pave link, now the links aren't displaying currently, but I've got a pave link going from the crown of the road to the edge of traveled way for each assembly insertion. If I come down to that pave link, I can move over to this column called material area fill style. Better name for that column would be hatch pattern. If I click, I can select a style. Note the style that I'm selecting is just a shape style. We saw these a little bit ago with the assembly. Basically, I'm applying a fill in a plan view here, as opposed to an assembly. You can see there's the red fill option there. I'm going to use this pave shape style. And if I bring this up in the editor, I'm basically saying, don't show me the boundary, just show me the hatch, and it's going to be this brown color. If I click OK and OK and choose apply, it will hatch the area created by those pave links. So my pavement is now hatched. In the event my corridor was to update, that hatch would update as well. So that's a way that we can have hatch dynamically tied to our corridor using the code set style. If I wanted to do it for my sidewalk, there's a sidewalk link here. Let me come down and find the sidewalk code, and I can apply a pattern to that. I've created one called concrete. If I bring that up in the editor, it's basically a shape style. Don't show me the boundary, show me the fill. I just made it gray, and I picked an AutoCAD hatch pattern. Let's click OK. I'll click apply. and okay. So using the code set style, I can very easily apply hatch patterns to my corridors using the link codes. Let's look at this. I'm going to select the corridor. I'm going to bring it up in 3D. I'm going to click the object viewer. And typically when I view my corridors in 3D, I click this corner hotspot twice on the view cube. That gives me a nice centrally located orbit point, makes it easy to orbit this. Now, as I orbit, what am I seeing here? These are markers. Those are the point markers from my inserted assemblies. Why are those showing? If you remember this particular code set style, I said, don't use those. Don't show those. I've got a no display style for my points. If I go to points here, that's what I set. If I go into the editor, I show you that so I can show you this. When it comes to object styles in Civil 3D, all of them are view dependent. I'm saying don't show these markers from a plan view, which is top down, what we have here. If I flip this to model, better word for that would be 3D. If I'm viewing this in 3D, you can see those markers are set to display in that view. So let me turn those off. I'll click OK and OK. That applies to all of these. I will then click Apply and OK. And now if I click my corridor and tip this up into 3D, we no longer see those markers. Okay. The code set style can be used to display render materials if we want, using the same workflow that we saw with links. If I go into this code set style, under link, each one of my link codes has a corresponding column for render material. So this is the exact same workflow as for the hatch patterns. The render material shows up anytime the corridor is displayed in 3D. So if I go to the pave links, we'll put a render material on the roadway. Let me open this up, and I happen to have a render material called asphalt in here. And then if you remember, I had links to the inside and outside of the sidewalk. If you remember that in my assembly, remember the sod links that I had? I'm going to find that sod code, and I'll open this up and I'll grab a render material. I've got one called grass short. Now, if you're wondering, there's not a lot of render materials in here. The additional resources I'll share with you at the end of the session has a video that'll show you how you can get more render materials loaded. Let's click Apply and OK. Now, if I grab my corridor and I bring this up in the object viewer, I'm going to view this in 3D. If I zoom in, you can see there's the grass material on the sod links. And if I zoom in close enough, you can see the asphalt material there in the roadway. So we can apply render materials using the code set style. Let's close this. I'm going to jump back into my code set style. Oh, we'll jump back into that one we were using. There we go. For my points here, I just want to drag this down a little bit further. Notice there's a pay item column in here. If you use the quantity takeoff tools in Civil 3D, maybe that'd be a good session. We could do one on the quantity takeoff stuff. If you've added a pay item list to your drawing, you can preload your pay items to these codes in your corridor. So, for example, my curb and gutter, for instance, the points generate the linear features. I've got my curb and gutter. If I had a pay item list, I could click here and I could grab the pay item associated with the curb and gutter. And then I could use Civil 3D's quantity takeoff tools to immediately extract linear footage of the curb and gutter, or I could extract linear amounts for any of these particular items, not just for the points, but I could do it for links as well. You can see there's pay items here as well. There's also ways with the quantity takeoff tool or the pay items that we can assign formulas to those to extract, to convert areas into gallons if we're talking about fertilizer that we're putting on sod and stuff like that. So good topic for another day, but just want to show you that this is also controlled in your code set style. And then finally, there's this classification column. This comes into play typically with shapes. If we extract solids from a corridor, we can have these items. This is like extended attribution that we can assign to the solids that are extracted. And then this additional attribute can show up in an application like Navisworks, for instance. Okay, dangerously close to the top of the hour here. Let me jump back over here. So we talked about a ton of things today. We looked at the code set style. We talked about the 4 places where they're assigned. You can assign them to your corridor. You can assign them to your sections. You can assign them to the section editor. You can assign them to your assemblies. They control the appearance and labeling of your points, links, and shapes. They can also do the feature lines. They can do hatch patterns. They can do render materials. You can also use them to assign pay items and assign extended attribution if you want to. We walked through the creation of a code set style. I'm hoping after seeing that, you kind of get the idea of what's going on in that dialog box. And if you do have an opportunity or a need, you can go in and make changes to one now in the future. And then when it comes to additional resources, I've created several videos on YouTube that are focused on code set style content. The titles are on the screen there. If you take a screenshot of this, you can do a search on those titles. Eventually, this session will be recording on YouTube, and there will be links to these in the description. Just in the interest of time, let me say that if we have any questions that have gone unanswered at this point, we will get back to you with an answer. And I'll say on behalf of Jerry Bartels, Angel Espinosa, Alan Gilbert, and myself, thank you so much for coming today. We really hope you guys find value in these sessions, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next 30-minute workout. Thanks.